I am excited to jump back into today's series that we've been in for the last few weeks, and today's message. It's one that's really on my heart. It's going to be a little unusual compared to maybe what you expect on Mother's Day, but I have no doubt God's going to meet us here. And so if you want to follow along in your app, or you want to follow along in your physical Bible, you can turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12. 2 Samuel chapter 12. It's a story I'd love for you to see. And while you're doing that, let me encourage you, if you are at all interested in our Jefferson County campus, part of this year's vision to expand for eternity, I want to encourage you to be here this Wednesday at 6:30 in this room. We're going to be talking about all the exciting things that are coming up in that campus. I'm going to share who the campus pastor is. I'm going to announce where the location is. We've got some major developments that have happened, and you're going to get all the most up-to-date information. So join us this Wednesday, 6:30 in this room. We'll have some refreshments, time of worship, and then I'm going to unpack everything for you. So if you're at all interested in the Jefferson County campus, you want to be here this Wednesday at 6:30. Now, if you're a guest, thanks so much for being here today. We've been in a series of talks, a series of messages called Puzzled. And here's the premise. I'll just catch you up. The premise is that since the day you were born, you've been on a journey to piece together the life you've kind of always dreamed of. And like the front of a picture the front of a box, like the picture of a puzzle, you've been piecing your life together. The decisions you've made have been trying to fit into that picture. Like you decided where to go to school, who to marry, where to work, based on the kind of outcome that you want to see happen. Well, as long as life goes on, what you know and I know is that life throws curveballs. You end up with a piece you never expected to have, or you end up with having to make a decision you never expected to make, and so you're trying to figure out what to do in the next step of your life, and sometimes we're left and we're puzzled or stuck with that season. And so this series has been just really trying to tackle some of these big questions, these big ideas about how do we go from being puzzled and stuck to back to piecing our life together. And over the last couple of weeks, I've talked to you about the missing piece. If you feel like something's missing in your life, I'll talk to you about that. Talk to you about the essential piece, the one that you got to have in order to have God's plan for your life. And last week, I talked to you about how God, in the middle of his plan, pieces together your life, and so that you can understand how he works in your life. But today, I want to share something that is very intentional, but also maybe not what you would expect on a Mother's Day weekend. But I really feel like God's challenged me to do it, and I believe it's because he wants to speak to the hearts of every person here. And so today, I want to talk to you about when life falls to pieces. When life falls to pieces. And I want to unpack this for you. And I'll open with a story. Puzzles are not my favorite activity, but occasionally Kayla will rope me into doing one. And most recently, we did one on a snowy day earlier this year, and it was a 750-piece Disney puzzle. So that is 750 pieces of pure princess torture for me that I had to go through. And now initially, I love it. I love spending time with Kayla, and it's wonderful. But to be honest with you, the process wears on with me. And so in this particular case, I just couldn't take it anymore, and I bailed about halfway through. And so Kayla spent the rest of the day piecing together piece by tiny piece, this puzzle until towards the end of the day, it was nearly complete. It was probably another 30 minutes, it would have been complete, and she decided, I'm going to go to bed, and then I'll get up tomorrow, and I'll finish this puzzle. And so she went to bed, and the next morning came, and I got up before Kayla. And so I went downstairs, but then as I'm going down the stairs, I realized that Sydney, our youngest, got up before me. And then I come down the stairs, I turn the corner, and that's when I saw the sight to behold, which was Sydney sitting in the middle of where a puzzle used to be, with pieces spread everywhere, with a big smile on her face, saying that she was helping doing the puzzle. I felt like the person who comes up on a car accident first. It was like, oh my gosh, this tragedy caused by toddlers, and just, it's just unbelievable. All the hours gone, all the effort gone. Just everything Kayla was building now is nothing but a pile of pieces. And I tell you that story because no matter who you are, where you're from, what you've accomplished, at some point in your life, for some of you, it's in the middle of where you are now. For some of you, it's what you've come through. For some of you, it's where you're going. At some point in your life, what you've been piecing together will unexpectedly fall to pieces. There will be a moment for you that you didn't picture coming, you didn't expect it, you didn't see it happen. And I know that we like to think of ourselves as invincible. We like to think that everything will go perfect. There will be a day that unexpectedly your life falls to pieces. Now, for some of you, that could look like that you lose the position that you've loved for so long. For some of you, it could be a financial setback that you never saw coming. For others, it's the sudden death of someone you love. For somebody else, it's a breakup that you never thought could happen. For some, it's an abuse. For some, it's an addiction. For some, it's a diagnosis. Here's what I've learned. The details are different, but the shock and the sorrow is the same. And so today, it's not the most kind of just celebratory thing, but I want to talk to you about what you're supposed to do when your life falls to pieces. Because here's the thing. It's going to happen at some point if it's not already happened. And it's my job to make sure you are prepared for that moment. It's my job to make sure you're prepared so that your heart doesn't get poisoned by the pain and that you spend so much time wrestling with it that you end up losing all hope. And my prayer is, whether you're going through it today or it will be in the future, here's what my hope is that when it does happen, that the Holy Spirit brings this message back to the top of your heart and reminds you, even though you may think your life is over, you serve a God who specializes in resurrections. He is a pro at rebuilding. He is an expert at restoring, and He will get you through these tragic seasons in your life. And there's really no better place to look at this than in the life of David. David was Israel's second king. He's one of the stars of Scripture. And here's the thing. Well, most of what we know about David is his victories. We know about David and Goliath and how David assumed the kingship after Saul tried to kill him. We know a lot about his victories, but here's what you should know. David had an equal share of tragedies in his life. And as a matter of fact, today in 2 Samuel chapter 12, I want to show you what I believe is the lowest point in David's life. A tragic season where everything falls to pieces that he has to pick it back up. And it starts with the fact that David shrugged off his responsibility as a king, and instead of being in the battlefield with his army and leading them, he chose to remain at the palace. And as we know, idle hands lead to the wrong actions. David kicks around for the palace for a few weeks, and then something happens when he makes really the biggest mistake of his life, and he goes into this idleness leads him to having an affair with someone else's wife. And not only did he have an affair, but this affair produced a pregnancy. And so now the king of Israel has a relationship that he shouldn't have, that's violated his integrity, and so he begins to try to cover it up. And the Bible gives us an elaborate plan that David put together, full of lies and full of all kinds of mistruths, but it ends with David actually murdering the scorned husband and taking taking the wife of this man. And so rumors are flying, and God sends a prophet to rebuke David. I mean, the whole kingdom is in jeopardy and things are going wrong. But in the middle of all that, the Bible tells us that now this new baby is born, and it's born with a serious illness. And so in short, David collapses. His life falls to pieces in this moment. And I want to show you kind of what's going on in that moment. Pick up in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 16. It says, David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and spent the nights lying in sackcloth on the ground. And the elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused. And he would not eat any food with them. And in spite of all this, on the seventh day, the child dies. Now, the English language really doesn't give us words to probably describe what David felt. I mean, we're talking about shame that is so heavy from sin that he struggles to breathe. We're talking about just wave after wave of grief from losing his child. We're talking about fear of his actions have cost him God's kingdom. And so everyone is standing around David on the worst season of his life, and they're wondering, how will he respond? And verse 20 picks it up, and it says, Then David got up from the ground And after he had washed, he put on lotion and changed his clothes. And he went to the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he went to his own house, and he at his request, asked his servants to serve him food, and he ate. And his attendants asked him, "Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you get up and eat?" And he answered, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept because I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? But now I will go to him, but he will not return to me." And then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, the woman he'd had an affair with. And he went to her and made love to her, and she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. So in these 5 verses, here's what we find. And these 5 verses contain David's response to the worst season of his life. And these 5 verses reveal how you and I can recover when our life falls to pieces. Now, but before I show you what David did, I want to explain what David did not do. In the middle of this giant tragedy, in this season, David did not ask, "Why is this happening?" And that's important to note, because in the middle of these crises in our lives, we want to know, why is this happening? Who's to blame for this? Why is this taking place? But David doesn't do that. And if you're in the middle of pain today, you want to know those questions. You want to know why. And I understand, because it's human nature. But let me broaden your thought in this, that the reason it's not of help to ask why in the middle of a crisis is because the answer or explanation is actually not helpful. For example, if I drop dead today, now Kayla would be in a lot of pain. She would also be very wealthy. But if I dropped dead today and Kayla knew why it happened, it wouldn't lessen the pain. Because when you're in that kind of place, you don't need answers, you need healing. See, here's the thing you need to realize. In this moment, the moment where your life's falling together, you need healing. And we only find healing. Only God can heal the deepest hurts of our lives. But only God can heal when we trust him to bring healing. See, there will be a moment where you have to decide in the middle of your hardest season, in the same way that you would lay down on a surgical table and trust a surgeon to open you up and heal your deepest wounds, you have to decide in these seasons that, God, I am going to open myself up and trust that your hand is the only one that can bring healing to my life. David did recover, but David recovered because he trusted God to be the one who puts him back together. And so in this season, whether it's now or it's in the future, here's what you need to know, that the decision you make about opening your heart up to allow God to heal you is one that will determine so much of the rest of your future. Because if you choose to open up and trust God and say, God, I need you to deal with this hurt, I need you to deal with this pain, what you're going to find is at the end, God is able to grow you and he's able to grow his intimacy with you. But if you close yourself off to God and you say, no, this pain's mine, I'll bear it alone, I'll keep it alone, here's what you will find. Years from now, you'll still be burdened by the pain. Years from now, you'll still be swimming in doubt. Years from now, you will find yourself at distance from the only person who can actually heal what you're struggling with. And so this decision is huge, to trust God in the middle of this difficult season. And so today I want to spell it out for you. I'm going to use an acrostic, the acrostic for the word trust, to show you how David and how you can begin to pick up the pieces and trust God in the most difficult season of your life. So here's the first one. It's the T. You got to start by telling God how you feel. Now, one of the mistakes we made when we're in a season of loss is this. We think we have to keep up appearances with God to appear spiritual. Like we think that in the middle of our hurt, if you're going to be spiritual, you got to grin and bear it. But listen, that's not true, because here's what I've learned. As long as we're acting, God is not. And until we get real, he can't actually restore the hurt that's in our lives. That's why the Bible says that David wore publicly, night and day, sackcloth. It was a special garment that he would put on that looked nothing like. It was a way of showing his internal pain in an external way to the people around him. David just decided, I'm not going to fake this. God, I'm not going to give you a fake face. I am hurting. I'm in pain. I'm struggling. I'm doubting. God, I'm not going to hide at this hurt. I need you to heal this in my life. Now listen to me. God is big enough to handle your hurt. His love is not so flimsy that he can't handle your anger and your disappointment and your doubts. Sometimes I think we forget God's the one that actually made the emotions that we feel. God created those emotions. And God created mourning so that we could express our hurt to him. Now here's why that's important, because we have a tendency to want to stuff it. We have a tendency to want to hide it. We have a tendency, especially men, to not want to engage it. But mourning is something God created. Grief is something God created so that we could express our hurt to him. And listen, it's huge in your life. As a matter of fact, mourning is so important that it's the way that you release the pain. You have to mourn if you go through one of these seasons. You have to. You can't just act like it doesn't matter. You can't just act like it doesn't. Listen, you can't just go around and act like that the divorce didn't hurt, or the diagnosis is not worrisome, or that you can't just go around and act that way, tweeting inspirational quotes. At some point, you have to mourn. You have to release the pain. And the reason that is because pain has no expiration date on it. And what has started in your life today will be with you 20 years from now if you don't let it loose and release it properly in your life. There are people who sit here today that their painful moment was 20 years ago, and it's still as real today as it ever was then. Mourning is the way you release that pain to God. Not only that, though, mourning is actually the way that you receive God's comfort. So you can't release the pain or receive God's comfort. So what do you mean? Jesus himself said this in Matthew 5:4. Here's what he said. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. You know what that means? It means until you open your heart up and actually let God know how frustrated and hurt you really are, he can't come in and begin to heal it with peace and strength and comfort in your life. Listen, David's first step to healing was opening himself up and being honest. And it'll be your first step too. Here's the second one. After you told God how you really feel, you need to refuse despair. Refuse despair. Another temptation in the middle of your hurt is to not trust God, to actually turn away from God and turn to your hurt. See, despair is the dark thoughts, the dark feelings that invade your heart when you've chosen to go over the hurt again and again and again. The more you've thought about it, the more you've processed it, the more you've looked at it, all of a sudden more and more and more despair comes in your life until you've focused on it so long that you actually have no hope left for the future of what God could do. And here's what I want you to understand. Disappointments are inevitable, but despair is a choice. Disappointments, life's going to be tough. There's going to be some things. Even Jesus said, in this world you'll have trouble, but despair is a choice. And it's chosen by what you choose to focus on in this hurtful time. When you choose to look at what went wrong and what they did and what happened, you are going to find greater despair. But if you'll instead choose to focus on God and his goodness, you will find that the antidote for despair is actually worship. Why is it worship? Because when you choose to worship, you choose to focus on God's goodness. Now, I know some of you probably don't believe that God's very good to you in these seasons. You think, everything in my life's bad right now. Everything's falling to pieces. What I'm saying is, if you'll look long enough, you'll look hard enough, you will find God's goodness somewhere in your life. For example, when you worship, you'll start to realize you at least still have breath in your lungs. There's a God who still loves you. There's a God who still cares for you. And even though it doesn't feel like it, he's still working and planning and plotting to bring about his best for your life. And listen, even if that doesn't connect with you, when you worship, you will have the realization that you are one of God's children. And listen, when you're one of God's children, it means you get to spend eternity with him in heaven, a place where there is no addiction, there is no abuse, there is no regret, there is no need for restoration, a place where cancer doesn't exist and depression has no room, a place where fear isn't there and abuse isn't there. You get to be a part of that, and all of a sudden you realize, even though things here are wrong, there all things will be right, and I will spend trillions of years more there than I will here. Listen, despair and worship cannot be in the same heart, because worship causes you to look and realize that you have an eternal Father, an unfailing friend, a perfect provider, an able protector, Someone who will be with you when no one else is with you. And as your eyes gaze on that, hopelessness cannot remain in your heart. That's why one of the first things David did is he got up and he went and he worshiped. Do you know why? Because David would say this to you, that the key to getting back on your feet is to get on your knees and worship. One of the first keys to getting back on your feet after this tragedy is to get on your knees and worship. Now, here's the next one. After you refuse despair, you need to unite with godly people. One of the wisest decisions that David made was he chose not to push everyone out. He chose not to suffer alone. That's powerful. He chose to let Nathan, a godly voice in his life, David chose to let his advisors come and help him with life. And I know that it's human nature that when you're hurting, you want to put everybody out. You want to withdraw. You want to put up barriers. But listen, don't do that. It's a huge mistake because most of the blessings that God wants to bring into your life, he's going to bring through people. And when you cut people out, you actually cut off God's delivery system for how he brings things into your life. And let me just say, God didn't create you to suffer alone. He didn't create you to support yourself, for you to have to bear it alone. God actually so intended for you not to do it alone that he created a spiritual family called the church. And we're here to support you. If you're hurting today, if you're in a season, you need to come to us. We're here to help you. And I don't just mean the staff. I mean, we're here to help you. We're here to be with you. See, Galatians 6:2 says it this way, because I want you to know as a church how to care for one another. Here's what it says: by helping each other with your troubles, you truly obey the law of Christ. Now, let me point out to you that this is not written to pastors. It's not written to just staff members. It's not written to just elders. This is written to you because God intended you, yes, you, He intended you to be someone who would help carry burdens for someone else because we're a spiritual family. You may not know the person that's sitting beside you, but in a spiritual sense, they are family. And God put you in that seat today so that you could help them carry what they're carrying in their life. Listen, so I want to teach you. I want to teach you how to care for each other. Now, let me say it this way. I had to learn this because sometimes we struggle with this idea of caring for one another. You know, I mean, we think, well, what could I say? What could I do? I don't know how to help them. When should I say it? When should I do it? And we start to think things like, well, if they need me, they'll come, or somebody else will help them, and we disqualify ourselves. Listen, it's much easier to care for one another than you think it is. Now, when I first started in pastoral ministry and kind of just, in my ordination process, I was really, really, really bad at bringing comfort to people. I remember my first few hospital visits, I was no comfort whatsoever. Like they probably, when they saw like the visitation list, they're like, I'm good today. I don't need him to come. And here's the problem. Part of it is I'm a germaphobe. And so I would walk in the hospital room and they'd be laying there and I'd be like all over here with a mask on, be like, I'm here to encourage you today. It's like I had a knee replacement, not the plague. You can come a little closer. And I just have this tendency, and then the other thing I felt like I had to do is I had to theologically explain why you're here. Let me bring all my charts and graphs and explain to you why this is happening in your life. Listen, when people are sick, they don't want a Greek word study. They just need somebody who will comfort them. And I remember the pastor that was helping me, a mentor, he was helping me and he said, listen, Joe, there's such thing called the ministry of presence. He says it means you don't have to say everything right. You don't have to do everything right. You just have to be there. You being there actually ministers to people. And he said it this way. He said, all you got to do is show up and share their pain. All you got to do is show up and share their pain. Listen, all you have to do is show up. Come on. You don't have to be invited. Who wants to invite people when you're going through the worst season of your life? You don't have to invite people. You know what one of the worst things you could ever say to someone who's going through a terrible season is, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Because when I'm struggling, I want to also seem needy. No. Just invite yourself in. Just come on in. Invite yourself. I would rather err on being a little too loving than not being loving at all. So just show up. But not only that, just share their pain. Listen, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to tell them why this divorce happened. You don't have to tell them how they're going to recover. You don't have to do any of that. You just be there. Just cry with them. Just be there if they need. Just help them. Help them do small things. Help them put things back there. Help them with their kids. Help them. Just be there. Just share the pain. As a matter of fact, I found that the greater the grief, the lesser the words that are needed. Because you just got to show up and you just got to share their pain. I want us to be a church that's like that. We're not just a crowd moving in and out in between services, but that we actually share in one another's pain. Now here's the next one. You need to surrender your future to God. In loss, one of the most challenging transitions is the idea of even moving forward. Because after you've been in loss, there's a lot of fear. And you're fearful about, will I ever get another job like this one? Will I ever be able to find another mate? Will I be able to ever move on without them? Listen, there's a lot of fear about the future. And what we want in these moments is to know everything about the future. Let me break it down. You're not going to know everything. You don't get paralyzed in the present because you need to know everything about the future. You just need to, see, you're not able to know everything about how it's all going to work out, but you can choose to surrender your life to a God who promises to work it out. And that's what David does. David says, I can't bring this child back, so therefore I must get on with my life. They asked him, David, how are you up now? Eating, drinking, moving on. He says, listen, I can't change the past, but I trust that God will work this out somehow, and one day I will be with this child again. And that's why in these seasons, one of the most comforting verses you could read is Romans 8:28. Romans 8:28, one of the most popular promises. Look, it says, and we know that God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. Now, this is one of the most encouraging verses in all the Bible. It's also one of the most misunderstood in all the Bible. Let me explain why it's misunderstood. First of all, we read it the wrong way. This does not say that God causes everything to be good. Listen, there's a lot of stuff in this world that's not good. Rape and racism and terrorism and bigotry. God doesn't promise that he'll make it all good. God promises that he'll work it all together for good. Let me explain it this way. So before, I was not a coffee person. But since I've been leading you and we got all these kids, now I'm an addict. Okay? So, it's necessary now. And almost every morning I will get up and it's before, we don't talk to each other before coffee. There's no sense in being like, we don't look at each other. You just make your way to the machine and then you make a cup of coffee. And here's what always happens. I take the first sip of just that wonderful blend and hot, and I just take the first sip and all I can muster is, man, that's good. Anybody have a that's good moment like earlier this morning? Yeah, some of you need it. Come on. But here's what I want to explain. When I take that drink and I say, man, that's good, I'm not saying the mug is good. Like man, this mug's good. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying this hot water is good. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying these coffee grounds, good. I'm not saying this filter is good. As a matter of fact, most of this stuff is not good. Like if I took a big old spoonful of coffee grounds, not good. If I ate this filter, not good. Drink hot water, yeah, not good. What I'm saying is there's a master designer that at some point has taken what's not good and what's not good and what's not good and what's not good and somehow figured out to design a perfect scenario where what was not good and not good and not good, and he worked it together until it was good. And what I'm saying about your life is your present may not be good. Your past may not be good, but there is a master designer who knows how to take what's not been good and what's not been good and what isn't good, and he knows how to work it and work it and work it and work it until it is good in your life. And that's exactly what he did in David's life. In David's life, God reached in as the master designer, and he took murder that was not good, and he took lies that were not good, and he took adultery that was not good, and he pieced it together, and he pieced it together, and he worked it, and he worked it, and he worked it until it came out forth in a pregnancy of a king named Solomon, who ended up becoming the wisest, most famous, and accomplished king to ever live in Israel, until 26 generations later, in the same lineage, God unveiled a new king, and his name was Jesus. So what he did is he took David's murder and David's adultery and everything that was messed up about David, and he said, if you'll give me enough time, I'll work it, and I'll work it, and I'll work it, and I'll work it, and I will bring the one who's good from it. And so what that means is that 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, what you despise now, you'll get to see somehow God worked it for good. Somehow he took that piece and that piece and that piece and that piece and that piece, and somehow today, and this is going to happen, I'm just telling you, it does all the time. It's hard to believe, but this is true. Years from now, you'll thank God for the day you curse now, because he's so good at making all things work together for good. And the season you enjoy then will be the one you despise now. But you got to surrender your life to him for him to be able to do that. Now here's the last one. The last one is this, that you got to take it one day at a time. You just got to take it one day at a time. I love the Bible, and I love how the Bible gives us intentional details. I love how it just said that there were some things in David. It just tells us that he just had to start with taking it one day at a time. Like, I love how it tells us he just got up and he just ate. He got up and he changed clothes. He got up and just took a bath, put some lotion on his face. I love how it says he just consoled his wife. Basically, it says David just took it a step at a time. He just took it a step at a time. What step do you need to take? For some of you, you just need to be willing to be around people again. For some of you, you just need to be able to have a conversation about what happened. For some of you, you just need to be able to open up and run an errand instead of just sitting in the grief and the hurt. For some of you, you need to today, a huge step would be for you at the end of service to step out and come share that you're hurting with someone and let them pray for you. What step do you need to take? You say, well, those aren't very big steps. Listen, in this season, baby steps are still steps. Baby steps are still steps in this season. Kayla and I recently were on a trip, and we detoured to see my grandmother, to visit her home. And now I want to confess, I love my grandmother and I wanted to see her, but I also want to confess that I love her pecan pie. And so this detour was very easy, and so we stopped, and we were going to have, we just chose to spend a few hours with her and have a piece or three, and so we sat down, and we had a cup of coffee, and we're kind of sharing, and we just love to hear the stories about her life, and so we asked her to start sharing some stuff about her life, and she just took us through the whole thing. She talked about how where she was born, and we got to hear about what life was like back then, and in this small little town, and then she talked about that her first job was at a movie theater and what that was like, and then she talked about how her and my grandfather had fallen in love and all that was. But then she got to a section on the timeline of her life that honestly, it could not be labeled anything other than tragic. She told us about how one evening she got a call from the state police that a man in her hometown had went mad and went on a rampage and murdered both of her parents. She told us about how one evening she was in church and someone came and tapped her on the shoulder and said, "You need to hurry home. There's been an electrical fire start at your house." But by the time that she and my grandfather got there, it was nothing but a pile of smoldering ash. She told us about how my grandfather was diagnosed with cancer, and though he fought very hard, he died at 56 years old. But what really blew me away was not that each of those are tragic. What blew me away is that she said all of that happened in the span of 18 months. And I'm just sitting there, and what couldn't compute for me is that my grandmother, she was here just a couple weeks ago, she is one of the kindest, most loving, tender, gentle, serving, generous people you would even meet. I'm telling you, if you met her today, she would have no problem talking to any of you. There are no introverts around her. She would talk to you. That she would hug you. She would tell you, about her home. And if you ever stop by, she'll make you a pecan pie. And I mean, she would do that. But at some point in the conversation, she would start to tell you how much she loves Jesus. And she would say something to the gist of just, he's just been so good to me. And what I can't figure out is how someone who's faced so much is still so full of faith. And so I just asked her, I said, how did you get through this? And she said this, she said, honey, Me and Jesus just took it one day at a time. Honey, me and Jesus, we just took it one day at a time. And that encourages me today for you. And here's why. Because David's life proves, and my grandmother's life proves, you are going to make it. You're going to make it. You will not be gripped forever by fear. You will not live forever without peace. You will not grow old and bitter and hard. You will not be a slave to what happened to you. You will make it because you and Jesus are going to take it one day at a time. And every day, each day that you show up, he shows up. And he's going to help you take another step. And he's going to help you take another step. And piece by piece, and step by step, and morning by morning, and day by day, and season by season, he will piece you back together. He will take everything that was gone and he'll be able to put it back. He's going to be able to help you build a new dream. He's going to be able to help you craft a new promise. He is going to help put you back together. And though you can't see today how any of this could work out, he is a professional at taking it all and piecing it back to where you will one day be better than you are today, because you and Jesus are going to take it one day at a time. And I know that's hard to believe, but I just need you to believe it by faith today. And I can just sense the heart of Jesus for you. And his desire to begin to piece together what's been so broken. And so I know this isn't a typical Mother's Day message, but I do believe it's God's will because he wants to piece you back together.